command economies eventually gave way to market economies. And maybe it happened like this, probably not, but let's talk about free market economies. Free market economies, or sometimes just called market economies, is a synonym for capitalism. And the United States, to an extent, is a capitalist free market economy. And what that means is that the workings of the market are not planned or directed. No one, no single person, no business, no government agency, nobody tells producers or consumers what to do. Economic decisions in a market economy are made voluntarily, and they're made one at a time, and they're made by millions of individuals, individual consumers and individual producers, and they are all guided by self-interest. What's going to be best for me? In other words, all decisions on what to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce it are left to individuals and businesses. And the key component to a market economy is competition, what we see here. Look at all those different products. Many of them do the same thing, but they are competing for those consumers' dollars. Competition is essential to a market economy. It gives consumers choice. It makes producers be more efficient and keep their prices down. And it makes producers keep quality high. And the same can be said on the labor side. When workers have different businesses competing for their labor, in other words, workers have a choice as to where they work, like we do, then it keeps their wages high, it keeps conditions at the workplace in good shape, and it's better for workers overall. The goals of a free market economy are to provide people with economic freedom. They can do whatever they choose in that economy. They're free to succeed or fail on their own based on their own decisions. And economic efficiency. A market economy, it turns out, is much more efficient at using resources, land, labor, and capital than a command economy or traditional economy. And we saw that in our in-class simulation. Economists often talk about the flow in a market economy. They talk about goods being produced and consumed, money being exchanged in a command economy. And the two main groups in a market economy are households, and that's individuals who live under the same roof, and firms. These are businesses that produce goods or provide services. The top half of the chart is easy to understand. This is the product market. This is where households give money in the form of payments. They give money to firms, and in exchange, firms provide households with goods and services. So individuals pay firms to buy a car, and the firms provide them with a new car. And households pay firms to provide a service. And so households or firms may provide dry cleaning service. This is the product market. The bottom half of the diagram is a little more confusing. Down here, firms give money to households. Firms give money to individuals for factors of production, because in a market economy, those factors of production are owned by individuals. So firms give wages to households. They provide rent for land they may be renting to households. Or they may make interest payments on corporate bonds or on stock dividends to individuals and households. And in exchange, households provide firms with the things that they need to produce. So households, individuals in a market economy, provide firms with capital, which is money for investment, money to build new machines, money to build new factories. They provide firms with land on which to build or on which to mine. Or they might provide labor to firms. They might go work at the factory. They might go work at the shipyard. They might go work in the mine. Households provide the factors of production, and firms in exchange give households what we call factor payments. This would be rent, wages, interest, or dividends. That's the market economy. Some people saw a problem in a free market economy. And as a result, the ideas of socialism and communism developed. During the Industrial Revolution, capitalism resulted in a growing gap between the rich and the poor, a growing gap between these factory workers we see here and the factory owners. These poor people were paid barely a living wage. Meanwhile, the company is doing very well, and the factory owner is keeping the vast majority of the profits for himself. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, two historians and economists, blamed capitalism for this growing gap. And they said that society should get rid of capitalism and replace it with what they called socialism. Under socialism, all property, really all the factors of production, would not be owned by individuals, but Marx and Engels said that type of property should be owned by society as a whole. So no individual should own a factory, it should be owned by everyone. No individual should own a railroad, that should be owned by everyone. And no individual should own a dock or a shipyard or any other factor of production, but rather owned by society as a whole. And that way, everyone can benefit from that. So when this factory makes a profit, it's not one person who gets the profit. The profits are shared among everyone. That's Karl Marx in the background there. Marx and Engels went on to say that in the final stage of socialism, we would have what they called communism. And under communism, there would be no more economic classes, no more rich, no more middle class, no more poor. Everyone would be equal. And all property and all wealth would be owned by everyone. And as a result, government would no longer be needed. That's what Marx and Engels meant by communism. Today, when we talk about communism, or when you hear communism in government class, or when you hear communism discussed by political scientists, normally what they mean is something slightly different. When they talk about a communist country or a communist government, what they mean is a combination of that socialist economy we were just talking about, where factors of production are owned by everyone, combined with a totalitarian government. And that's what you learned about your freshman year, a totalitarian government where the government controls all aspects of people's lives, where they work, maybe who they marry, what they can do, what freedoms they have, what they can read. So a communist government today, when we talk about it, is socialism combined with totalitarianism. We saw that form of communism in the modern command economies that emerged in the 1900s. The best example being the Soviet Union from 1917 until 1990. The Soviet Union, or the USSR, had private ownership banned People in Russia could not privately own the factors of production. So Russian people could not own a railroad. They could not own a factory. They could not own a shipyard or a dock or anything else that was major and important and used in production. These things were owned by the government, and the profits were shared with everyone. Also in the Soviet Union, economic planning was done by government officials, not the market. So rather than letting producers and consumers make decisions, the government made decisions. The government decided how much is going to be produced. The government decided what was going to be produced. The government decided how things were going to be produced, with what resources. And the government decided who was going to get those products, those goods and services. If you think of reality TV, we can see an example. In the United States, we have a lot of reality TV shows. And we have a lot of reality TV shows because people are watching them. If people stop watching them, networks will stop producing them because there's no longer a profit to be gained. Now, in the Soviet Union, the government would have decided how many reality TV shows to produce. They probably would have produced much fewer reality TV shows than we have. They probably would have produced just a few and then produced educational programs or programs about the arts because they would decide what society needs, not necessarily what society wants. In the Soviet Union, the government decided what to produce with what resources. They decided what prices would be and what wages would be and how to distribute those goods and services. Their goal was to provide economic equity, make all Russians equal, and provide economic security, make sure all Russians have a job that they can count on. And they had that because the jobs were provided by the government. And people, for the most part, were equal. Unless you were in the Communist Party, you were pretty much equal. The problem was you were poor. Russia suffered a major problem with shortages. In addition, their economy was constantly having problems because planning an economy is very complex and very difficult. And the other problem with the Soviet Union was that there was no incentive for workers to work harder or to work better or to work more efficiently or to develop a new product or service because their wages were going to stay the same. Here in the United States, people are constantly coming up with new products. Some of them fail, some of them succeed. But people do that because there's a chance they can make a profit. Russian workers didn't have that, and as a result, there was no incentive for workers. They suffered through shortages, like you see here. This is people lined up to get goods that they need. And the economy was just too complex to plan. This concludes our lecture. Again, this information is in Chapter 3, Section 3 of our Economics Alive textbook if you want to look there for further information.